see. I see. I love it.
Hello and welcome to CrossTalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. Facing hard realities or committing an act of selfish political folly. These are some of the reactions to David Cameron's call for a renegotiated relationship with the EU and then a referendum on future membership. Would Britain and the EU be better off going separate ways? To crosstalk Britain in the EU, I'm joined by Tony Halperin in London. He's a journalist for The Times. Also in London, we have Robert Oles. He is director of the Bruges Group. And in Brussels, we cross to Georgios Chatzimarkakis. He is a Liberal member of the European Parliament and head of the German Hellenic Business Association. Tony, I'd like to go to you first in London. It seems to me that Britain's position in the European Union is equivalent to how Americans feel about gun control. People get really excited about it here. Is Cameron playing politics? Is this just for his personal agenda and getting re-elected and nothing more?
I think there's a great deal of that. Cameron's effectively offering voters a chance to decide on EU membership after the next election, and implicitly, therefore, they should vote for him at the election in order to get that chance. So Mr. Cameron is effectively trying to eliminate the threat posed by the UK Independence Party and push Labour and the Liberal Democrats into what he considers to be an unpopular position with voters of denying the voters an opportunity to decide their EU future. So there's an awful lot of domestic politics involved in this initiative. Okay,
before I go to Robert, I mean, it's quite transparent, isn't it? I mean, it's cynical politics. I mean, how does the average Briton feel about this? Or can you say that about an average Briton?
To be honest, I think the average Briton won't really mind if they're given the opportunity to decide on the EU. As many people have commented in the run-up to this speech, British voters haven't had an in-out question put to them about EU membership, or in fact common market membership as it was last time they were asked, for close on 40, 50 years. People would like to decide that question, and until they're given an opportunity to do so, I think that they'll back the party that says we will give you that chance. Okay, Robert, so it's democracy in action, isn't it?
Absolutely. Finally, we're going to be having a say on the European Union. British people have been denied that opportunity to express what they think. Political parties across the spectrum had promised referendums and then broken those promises, and that's one of the reasons why we are where we are now, with people saying we must get out of the European Union, because the political class, the political parties who have all favoured EU integration, have allowed things to go far too far. And now, of course, they're reaping the whirlwind, and that is there's going to be a referendum, and this is now irresistible. And I think Labour will be forced
We're getting ahead of ourselves. We don't know if there'll be a referendum. Jorgo, if I can go to you in Brussels, why not renegotiate Britain's engagement with the European Union? Why not?
We renegotiated every time, and every time on Britain's behalf. Britain wanted it. We have a picture to describe the British situation in the European Union. It's like a train, the European train, passing a station and moving on. The British would always try to keep the train in that station. So that's to say, at this level of integration. And only when the train finally moves on, they would jump on the last wagon and run into the steering room and try to take over the steer. That was history in the past, and I think the atmosphere in Europe changed. We know that British behavior, and we are, to be honest, fed up. This time we would urge the British to go for a referendum, why not, but not to let the other Europeans wait until 2017. I can't see the reason for such a long period. Do your decision in your insular territory, make the right decision, but do it fast and don't let us wait.
Okay, Tony, I saw you smiling, and what we just heard were fighting words. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I think that those are very fair points, actually. The risk of Mr. Cameron's strategy is simple, that the next election becomes all about Europe and about nothing else. And secondly, people tend to answer the question that they want to answer at referendum, not necessarily the question they're asked. Antipathy towards the EU is such that people may simply vote to go out even if the deal offered to them is a pretty good one. And I don't see much incentive for the other EU members to seek to accommodate Britain, precisely for the reasons that Georgios said, that many in the EU, and particularly in the EU 17 who are members of the Eurozone, are pretty fed up with what they consider to be British backsliding and foot dragging. They might be quite happy for Britain to go out so that they could go on with establishing a kind of United States of Europe.
Robert, how do you feel about that? Is that okay with you?
Well, Peter, I think there's a danger that myself and Hugo can actually agree. He's fed up with
no,
Britain.
don't do that. Don't do that on this program.
I'm most certainly fed up with the European Union. So really, we can have some agreement there. Really, yes, the referendum should be as soon as possible. And the whole policy that David Cameron has set out of renegotiation, with powers coming back to the nation state, and actually first he wants to change how the whole European Union works with introducing flexibility for all countries. Well, that's just not feasible, because the political class in the EU, which Hugo is a junior member, actually supports further integration. They actually support more powers going from nation states to the institutions of the EU based in Brussels, Luxembourg and Strasbourg. So the answer is really that we have a referendum on coming out as soon as possible, because powers cannot be returned.
Okay,
not in any significant, meaningful way.
Georgios, you wanted to jump in there. Go ahead.
It's absolutely true what has been said right now. It's true that we need further integration, and I can't imagine that the United Kingdom will go all the steps along that we need now to get out of this not currency crisis but debt crisis. And Mr. Cameron has proved in the past that he's not respecting European law. I remember very well when the Greeks fell into that austerity trap, the debt austerity trap that was caused, by the way, by an IMF error that the IMF now has admitted. Mr. Cameron reacted not by "we will show solidarity." He said
by the euro,
we have to close we have to close the borders for Greek citizens because we might face big migration. So this was his attempt to get out of European legislation, because it's legitimate to migrate from one EU country to another. So Mr. Cameron has not a European conviction. He should give back the Elgin marbles if he wants to do such statements, but he doesn't. He takes on the Greek tax evaders. He welcomes them, but he wouldn't take the Greek migrants who need to work. So this is not a European consciousness. If he wants to leave the Union, he should do it fast.
Okay, Tony, the Brits have been accused of cherry...
for the Greeks.
Let me go to Tony. Is this cherry picking? Is this what the Brits are doing, cherry picking?
We could provide a list of every country ignoring EU obligations, and it would be quite a long list, and it would include Germany and France. So I think we can set that one aside. But I think the main point is correct, that the EU project is first and foremost a political project. The present EU currency crisis is caused by the fact that really they haven't had a fiscal union, and then for a fiscal union to be democratic there has to be a political union. He's correct in that Britain will never sign up to a political union, will never sign up, I think, to a monetary union. So it's inevitable that the hardcore of EU members, the 17 who now have a single currency, are pretty much obligated to pursue that to its final end, which is some sort of political union. Countries which don't sign up to that objective have to establish a different relationship with the EU. The question then becomes whether it's an in-out relationship, whether you're obliged to leave the EU in order to establish that relationship. Personally, I don't think so. I think the risk of a referendum that Mr. Cameron runs is that voters will tell him that's exactly what they want to do, and then he faces an almighty problem in untangling British relations with the rest of Europe. It's not just a question of politics, it's a question of geography. Even if Britain came out of the EU, we're still only 20 miles from France.
Okay, Robert, that's a very good point here. I mean, completely untangled. Is that even possible right now?
Well, absolutely. Britain can trade and have economic contact with businesses and consumers on the continent, just like Audi, French wine producers or other German car manufacturers can sell their goods to the UK. That will continue once Britain is out of the European Union. And actually, getting out will actually be quite easy. Britain is, along with other EU member states, a member of the European Economic Area. We could cancel our EU membership, retain the European Economic Area membership, and that would keep the free movement of goods, services and capital, as well as labour, for the time being, until we form some new transitional arrangements and set up a pure free trade area. So trade will continue once we're outside of the EU. We could be out of the political union, and that would be a very good thing for our democracy and for our economy.
Okay, go ahead.
That it would make many people in Europe quite happy.
Jump in.
Well.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I have bad news for Robert now, because he's right, trade will go on, but the conditions for trade will be totally different once you don't belong anymore to the entity that decides about all the rules of trade. Norway faces that, Switzerland faces that. They cannot influence the trade rules. They just can do trade, but they cannot influence.
Not correct on the process of how the EU works.
Sorry. As a legislator, I know very well.
No, that is not correct.
Robert,
Norway,
let me finish
as other European economic areas, countries, they are consulted on legislation, they have input, and of course they have their own voice in all the many of the international bodies that decide a lot of these regulations. Norway has pushed for maritime regulation.
Before we go to the break, I want to go to Tony.
Organisation, which has later been adopted by the EU.
I got the impression,
Norway
Tony,
does have
that you
influence,
disagreed with Robert,
please.
Robert, please. Tony, before we go to the break, you look like you were dismissive.
Yeah, I think it's very difficult to be outside a club and be affected by its rules. The rules will be imposed. You don't have a choice whether to accept them or negotiate them. They're presented to you, and it's a single economy against the collective weight of, I don't know, 17 or 18. Norway and Switzerland do have to comply with whatever regulations are presented to them.
Norway recently vetoed an EU rule, an EU law on relating to energy. Norway actually does that. They can do that if they wish.
Robert,
unfortunately, their political establishment supports EU membership and wants to go along with most things, but when there is something of great importance, they can actually veto an EU law.
All right, gentlemen, I want to keep the tempo up, but we have to go to a short break. And after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on the UK in Europe. Stay with RT.
I love it.
Welcome back to CrossTalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. To remind you, we're discussing the UK and the European Union. I'd like to go back to Georgios in Brussels. I think this is a very interesting time for the British to call for a referendum, even if it's going to be 2017. I mean, Europe is still on the mend, and if we look at the European Union and we look at the Eurozone, this is something that this is very bad timing because they still need to mend the process. And that means more Europe. And that's not, everyone doesn't want that right now.
Exactly. We need more Europe right now, and all the measures that have been taken to tackle the debt crisis in Europe at the beginning didn't seem to be coordinated, but at the moment we can see that they do have an impact on the economies and on the societies. And should Britain decide to run out, they are out of the decision-making process. They are out of influencing this democratic process, of influencing rules. And we saw that. I'll give you an example in the emission trade system. That was very much influenced by the City of London, because the City of London is a net benefiter of this trade emission scheme, carbon trade emission scheme. And being outside the European Union, British members of Parliament, British commissioners, British politicians in the Council could not anymore influence this very, very important piece of legislation.
Carbon trading
this will be
jobs
the effect
in this country, real jobs
carbon trading
in steel production.
Yeah, but sorry,
it's driven jobs out of Europe to other countries which don't follow the rules, such as India and China.
May I just finish
carbon trading is something we shouldn't really have.
We'll go to Brussels. Finish your point. Go ahead. Go ahead. Finish your point.
What Robert says is exactly my opinion. I think that the emission trading system is wrong, but the lobby of the City of London was the biggest lobby I ever had in this European Parliament, my 8 years here now. So you see, it was a British interest, City of London. Once you're out, you will be out for a long time, and you can't influence it anymore. And the financial transaction tax is a next step that might harm London. It might help London, we will see, but in the long run, of course, if you can't influence the rules, you will lose.
Okay, Tony, I mean, what...
There's a dishonesty,
Go ahead. Go ahead, Tony. Mm-hmm.
There's a dishonesty right at the heart of this debate, which is that Europe always talks about more Europe and the need for rules and regulations. But the fundamental British objection, the thing that's driving Britain out of the EU, is democratic accountability. And nobody in the other European institutions wants to talk about the fact that people in their member countries were never really asked whether or not they want a single political state, which is the general direction of travel of the EU at the moment.
Oh, please cut.
Britons are going to be asked that question, and we pretty much know the answer. But nobody else is being asked whether they do want that. And if they did want that, then it would be much more apparent to Britons that they could have some democratic influence on EU institutions, that it would be a democratically driven project instead of what looks increasingly like a bureaucratic driven project.
Okay, Robert, I know your opinion. Go ahead, though. Please do.
One of the main things is democratic legitimacy, and the EU certainly lacks that. The Commission proposes legislation. The Commission hasn't been elected. There's a lot wrong with the EU system, and that's not going to be reformed. They're not going to make it democratic. But the costs of EU membership are also enormous. The money that Britain has to pay over each year counts in the billions. The cost of excessive regulation holds back the economy, and that's one reason why EU economies are going backwards in the global picture, whereas the economies that have freer markets, are less regulated, less government interference, they're the countries that are now growing, and that's where the future lies. But Europe is consigning itself to the past because of its system where there's excessive regulation coming from the Brussels bureaucracy.
Okay, let's go to Brussels.
Well,
Jorgo, go ahead. No. Let's hear the other side of the argument. Go ahead, Jorgo. Please do.
Why then, Robert, the British industry and British economy, the representatives of the British economy are against that referendum? Why is it so? Because they want to have access to the decision-making process, they want to have access to the big market, and they know that they will lose that.
That's not
Robert,
40
your
businessmen signed a letter to the Times yesterday saying they supported the referendum.
Jorgo, finish up. Go ahead.
No. Yeah. It's the line of arguments that Mr. Farage uses here. So Mr. Cameron has become the spokesman of UKIP, has become the spokesman of Mr. Farage, who is, of course, against the European Union. I never would have expected this from the Tory party, because the Tory party in the past did understand our interest is to at least keep one foot in Europe and not to leave it 100%. This is over now, and it's a pity, because our Lib Dem friends in the United Kingdom are also in government. They have a different agenda. They have a pro-European agenda, and you could see that Labour has won some 2 or 3% after the speech of Mr. Cameron. So it's not that all the British share his view.
Okay, Tony, again, it looks like it's just domestic politics here. It looks like a game of chicken to me.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I think the point about Mr. Farage and UKIP is an accurate one. Cameron is clearly trying to marginalise them. But I keep coming back to this point. It's not about markets and it's not about regulation. It's about democratic accountability. You know, if there's a political project called Europe, then how is that to be held accountable to the citizens of Europe? The majority of British people, I think, find it very difficult to see how that happens. They don't wish to be governed by people that they can't throw out of power, and therefore they're being driven to seek some way an exit from the EU instead of a new relationship with it. And no one is answering that question, really. If you have, at the end of the day, some sort of United States of Europe, where is the democratic accountability to the citizen in the street? And until that question is answered, I think Britain will increasingly head for the exit. And I have to say, I don't think that's a good thing. I think Britain out of the European Union will be very isolated.
It seems to me that your position is that it's a work in progress, that it will become more democratic with more integration, correct?
Well, on one hand, we shouldn't
not
forget
on the agenda.
on the European Constitution.
Go ahead.
On the European Constitution. It failed in France, in the Netherlands, but it was supported in other countries like Luxembourg, like Spain. So we had referenda and we had a clear say of European citizens. On the other hand, I myself, I'm representing the European citizens. I'm every day in this house. I'm every day working hard on legislation, on clearly putting into the negotiations also the spirit and the voice of the European citizens with whom I talk. Yesterday, to give you an example, I had to vote on a regulation in the committee, and I received phone calls by a British-based, organized by a British-based website, phone calls by 50 citizens of my country trying to influence me. So it's I like this because it's a very direct way of communicating with citizens, and I'm here to represent them. So it's absolutely wrong to say that the citizens are not represented. We are on equal footing with the Council, equal footing with the Commission, since the Lisbon Treaty, the so-called Lisbon Treaty.
The Commission proposes the legislation. The Council has far bigger say than the Parliament.
Okay, Robert, I want to ask you a question. Gentlemen, hang on. Let me ask a question here. Robert, do you think you represent millions of people in the European Union? In your opinion?
Well, the best representative of people in the European Union is national parliaments. That's where power should lie, with national parliaments, and then those national parliaments can have governments which can choose to cooperate on areas where they wish and where they see fit. But at the moment, the European Union is telling other countries what to do. It doesn't represent people at all. It's dominated by an unelected commission based in Brussels, which proposes legislation which binds states throughout the European Union. We should return powers to national parliaments. That's what the British want to do, and that's what should happen in other countries as well. As Hugo mentioned, the French and the Dutch rejected the EU constitution, but of course they brought it in via another name, the Lisbon Treaty, and fought it on those peoples anyway. The people do not want more Europe. The political class does. They want more power to be handed to unelected, unaccountable institutions, because that gets rid of the annoyance of having to deal with members of the public who can often vote down EU rules and shatter their beloved dreams. Really, the answer is more power to national democracies, because that is the only institutions that have legitimacy within Europe, not the European Commission,
let me get it. Tony, what do you think?
In secret without minutes being taken.
Tony, is this a precedent that could be set here? I think that's the danger for a lot of people that believe in the European Union project, that Britain is starting a precedent here to get out.
Yes, well, I think many other countries in Europe don't want to get out, but they do want a new relationship in the way that Mr. Cameron has described. I suspect the result for Britain will be exit, and that will damage the interests of a lot of other countries. But I'm not sure there's a rush to the exit for particularly some of the smaller Central European states which only recently joined the EU. But I keep coming back to this question. The central group of 17 nations eventually will become a single political unit. And the rest of the EU, which is 10 nations, have to have some new relationship with that unit. This will necessitate everybody else opening up discussions about their future relations within the EU.
Do you think that
what
that would
Cameron's
create...
done is proposed an exit from the EU.
Would that create a two-tier EU? I mean, that could be a solution as well.
I think we have one already.
Okay.
We have one already.
Jurgo, what do you think about that? I mean, to two different directions because of the currency.
First of all, the crisis or crises always were pushers, were incentives for the Europeans to stick closer together and to do steps of integration. So again, this crisis, the debt crisis, brought us closer together. The Club of 17 is the core of what we will see in the future. Being in or being out will be decided very, very soon, and Britain paved the way. What I would like to say to Robert is that he contradicted himself. On one hand, he says the Commission has the say, and the Commission is so mighty and is not democratically elected, which is wrong because they are approved by the European. It opposes. It makes. It initiates legislation. Sorry, it just has the right of initiative. You should read before you comment on it, you should really read how it works here.
It has the right of initiative, yeah, not the European Parliament, which you belong to. Usually parliaments initiate legislation. That's a purpose. Usually you vote in a parliament, that creates a government. That's how democracy works.
All right, gentlemen, I think we could go on for a very long time here. Many thanks today to my guests in London and in Brussels, and thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time, and remember, crosstalk rules.
I love it.